Hi, I'm Academic of RackForms. In this video, we are going to take a look at the Builder toolset. This is a video that is very specifically meant for users learning this powerful tool. So briefly then, what is Builder? Well, Builder is our way of querying a database and returning the rows from that database table. It could be a view, store procedure, etc. There's a lot of ways you can get data from a database, and RackForms supports them all. Part of the trick with this is here I'm looking at a way of going into a database and grabbing records out. In this case, this is a program called SQL Pro on my Mac, and I've selected the FB demo table, and it's now showing me the data in a grid-like format. I can go in and I can do things like I can add new values at will, so I could say Steve, or I can change existing values, make somebody older or younger. What we try to do with the Builder tool set is essentially mimic this capability. Look at a database table and allow users to either see the data or update the data. So within RackForms then, we have two main ways of doing this. There is what I like to think of as the simple way, and then there's a slightly more complex way. And I want to show both in this video. So first, the simple way. I'm going to create a new job. I'm going to create a Builder page. I'm going to click the repeater that's added to my page. And by the way, if you don't have a repeater built into your page automatically, we can add one right under repeater right here. Just click this guy. And I'm just going to say generate template basic. RackForms has generated some template code for me. And now it's going to, when I save the form here, it's going to run this query, select all from FB demo. It's then going to run the result of this database query through the template, which has been created right here. And it's now going to display that information to my user. So this is our base plate. You can see here that in a lot of ways it matches what we had right here, right? I'm showing all the columns from the database and all of the data within those columns. We could take it one step further, and I could say instead of doing the basic template, I could generate a multi-update template. And now when I click save, you can see here that I'm getting something that's much, much closer. Now I do have the ability to change values and hit update to save those changes. So that's the simple way. And I would actually recommend for most uses just sticking with that, especially when you're getting started. Just seeing here the generate template items, basic and multi-update. For a lot of what we need to do, this will suffice. However, we could certainly get more complex when we want to. And by getting more complex, I essentially mean we can write more complex SQL, or we can modify the templates by hand. So let's take a look at both. So let's say I want to modify my select statement here. So then instead of selecting all the columns, I'm only selecting the name, age, and email. I can once again hit generate template. It'll now rerun this query. It'll see that name, age, and email are the columns that we select, and it has now updated the template to reflect that. So you can see now I'm only returning those columns. I could further modify my statement so that we don't include any rows with empty data. So I could say where name is not equal to an empty string. Once again, I'll click generate template, and now we get only rows that have a name value. So we can do a lot with just modifying our statement right here and having RackForms generate the template for us. But we could also generate templates by hand, and we can modify those templates. So first, modifying. Right now when I run this form, you notice that name, the A and age, and email right here, they're not capitalized. So I can change that very easily. I can open my template right here, and where we have name, age, and email, I can simply change those values. So I can make these capital. And now when I run the form, indeed they have been changed. So that's nice. But we could do more though. So let's say instead of having RackForms generate the template for us, I want to generate it by hand. I'm actually going to take the source code of this guy, I'm going to delete it, And I'm going to click this guy right here, insert template. And then under the template select right here, I'm going to select which template I want. So I'm going to select, let's say, a 3-column table. I'll click OK to that, and now I have this. So I have a table with what we call 3 tokens, and these 3 tokens are displaying the ID, name, and age. So you'll notice here that RackForms is doing some stuff for us. So it saw that I'm generating this template, and so because I'm using the FB demo table, it's just kind of by default said, right, let's display the ID, name, and age columns, right? These fields right here that have been created may not actually match what you want. They may not actually match your table. And so we can change them anytime. So let's say instead of ID, name, and age, I actually want to display it in this format, name, age, and email, right? Kind of duplicating what we had before. So right now, I've changed the headers, and if I run this form, you'll notice that name, age, and email is indeed my headers, but I've not actually changed the tokens that are displayed. So I can delete the tokens by putting my cursor and clicking there, and I can use the token chooser to say which field is displayed. Now the token chooser has a bunch of different options, but the most simple ones are these guys on the far left. These are simply going to display the name, age, and email fields wherever I put my cursor. So I could say display name there, age here, and email right there. And now when I run this form, that's exactly what it does. So you'll notice now that we're actually very close to what we had before. So I started from scratch. I added the template by selecting a template. In this case, I knew I wanted 3 columns of data, so I selected a 3-column table. But you'll notice we also have things for like 5-column. I then took that template, I changed the header values, and I used the token chooser right here to say what should go on those fields. Now, the most basic token, as we saw right here, are these guys on the far left. This is simply going to display that information for each one of these rows. But we also have other tokens. So, for example, I have what we call a function token. So let's say instead of just displaying the name as it is in the database, I actually want to run it through a custom function that makes it uppercase. So I would click the function token, and now here's where another really big concept comes in. So you may have noticed before that I can actually click on these guys right here, and it actually brings up the token properties. From the token properties then, we have a list of what our token mappings are, and then I can actually change the token value right here. So the token type is a custom function. The token mappings are, here's my function name, and then the field to run the function on. So in this case, the field to run the function on is name, which is fine, that's what we want, and I can actually put a custom function. So let's say toUpper. So I'm actually going to define now a PHP function called toUpper in my PHP head code block right here that's going to make all those fields uppercase. So I'll define my function. It's going to pass in a value by default. Actually, make sure that's proper. And I'm going to return a built-in PHP function that simply makes my string uppercase. So I can actually preview this form, and sure enough, instead of just displaying the name value as it came from the database, again, in this case, Joe Smith with a capital J and S, it's running it through a custom function called toUpper, which we got from our function token. The toUpper function is defined in our PHP head code block. It takes the value of the field as an argument, and we're just simply running string toUpper on that value and returning it. Now, if you're not a programmer, I certainly don't want to scare you away. This may be totally foreign to you. The point here, and the big takeaway, is that we have a lot of flexibility within the repeater tool. So again, we can be very simple and simply display the name field by clicking this guy right here and displaying it, or I can get tricky and use a function token. However, there are other tokens that we can play with as well. We have a bunch over here. We're not going to cover this in this video, but we have things for like displaying images from a database, creating links, etc. But the one thing I do want to play around with real quick is this guy right here, this pager token. So one of the most common things that we're going to have to do, especially if we have a lot of data, is page through it. And RackForms makes that simple. We simply put our cursor where we want the pager to appear, and I'm simply going to click on pager. RackForms has now added this pager, once again, as a token, though we can't actually change this so I can actually say what the button text is going to be. In this case, back and next is fine. But then one thing I want to do when I add a pager is I'm going to make sure I'm going to toggle on use paging and sorting. Now, if I don't do it, RackForms will actually give us a warning right here that says your template uses a pager, but your job doesn't have the use paging sorting checked. So we're going to simply want to make sure we check that. You notice this field highlights yellow, and that's because it actually wants, well, which field do we want to sort by? In this case, we'll sort by age. Now when I run the form, that error goes away, and our pager has been added to our form. So I can actually page through my results, as you see right here. So again, kind of summarizing here, these tokens are at the heart of what RackForms is doing with the builder repeater, right? Everything is driven from an SQL statement right here that the result of that SQL statement is then run through our template. In this case, our template is saying we want to display a pager and we want to display the name, age, and email fields. Some of the stuff is dynamic. Our tokens right here are definitely dynamic, right? For every row that we iterate over, this name value is going to be different, right? It's always going to be the value that existed in that row. Some fields are static though. So this name, age, and email text is static. And a lot of what comes down to working with Builder is knowing that some of these fields only show once where others repeat. It's a little bit inside baseball, a little seeing how the sausage is made, but I do want to point out how this magic is happening right here. So if I actually look at the source code for my template right here, you can see here that I have this HTML comment called repeat start, and then I have a second one called repeat end. This is really, really important. If you're not very familiar with HTML, I apologize, but when I look at this, I can see here that this is where the name, age, and email headers are actually being displayed. However, we don't actually repeat over this TR block right here. We only repeat over the contents in between the repeat start and repeat end blocks right here. And of course, the things that we're repeating over are the dynamic values of the name, age, and email columns. And you'll actually see these HTML comments sprinkled throughout our code, especially when we're having RackForms generate templates for us. So for example, let's say instead of this field right here, this template I should say, I actually want to have one of our multi-update templates. So once again, I'll click multi-update. RackForms is now going to go in and either give us a warning about a primary key, which, my apologies, I should add that real quick. It's going to go in, it's going to change my template code for me. And now, as we can see when I run this form, it has once again created our update template. Now this update template right here uses a slightly different syntax, and we can actually look at it, and I actually encourage you to do that in the source code. So I'm going to look at the source code for this, and now you can see here that we have a few other items being included. So here you can see that I have a token for update start right here, and whenever we have one of these comments right here, we'll have a matching one. So here's where the update logic starts, and here's where it ends. Here's where the multi-update repeat starts, and here's where the multi-update repeat ends. Now it's really, really important that generally speaking, you do not need to memorize or even know what these things are. But it is important, especially when you're working with Builder, to at least understand why they exist in your template code. They exist to essentially tell RackForms, when it actually builds this form, to actually replace these guys with PHP code. So if we were to look at the source code of the finished page, we'd actually see that our multi-update repeat start is actually a bunch of form code and a bunch of other code behind the scenes that allows our update page to actually work. And so that's basically it. Again, if I could summarize, the basic idea here is when we're working with builder repeaters, the first thing that we always think about is the SQL statement that we're actually running, and we have a lot of control over that SQL statement. So here I took a simple select all statement where we kind of returned all the columns from the database, and I refined it to just show the ID, name, age, and email. I then say which database table I want it from, in this case FB demo, and I even added a where condition, in this case where name was not equal to an empty string. I then played around with my tokens a little bit, and we saw here that using the token chooser, I could very simply put a name value by saying name right here, or we could use more advanced tokens as we're using right here for doing things like updating, displaying images, or creating links. When that was done then, we also saw how we could tweak these tokens and tweak our normal values right here so that they work in concert together. Again, some things display statically like these guys, and some things repeat. If you're ever interested in seeing why some things repeat and why some things are static, it's helpful to look at the code for our template to see that, aha, here I could see that our multi-update repeat starts after the block where we defined our header columns. That's why our header columns only display once, and these guys repeat. It's because they're in a multi-update repeat block. Of course, the end result of that is we get something like this. Notice real quickly here that I actually changed the name field right here to, instead of being an update field, to just be a display field. So generally speaking, if I could summarize what we've learned right here, usually it's easiest to not actually build templates by hand, but to actually use the generate template and then to tweak the template as needed from that generated output. And so that's our quick look then at Builder Repeater. Again, there's a lot of things that we haven't actually touched in here. And the reason for that is actually very simple. Building these types of forms, that is displaying information to users, is a really involved process. In fact, as a developer, if somebody told me that they want to display information from a database, I'd actually have to ask them a bunch of questions about what specifically their goal was. Usually just displaying things from a database is not the final result. We actually want to have update forms, or we want to link to another page. And that's why the RackForms builder has so many different options. So we try to make sure that for every one of those scenarios, we have a shorter, simpler way of doing it. And that's why for all jobs, I always suggest starting with the generate template right here, and then selecting basic to just show fields, or perhaps multi-update to allow the updating of data, and then tweak that template from there. Of course, if you ever have questions about this or any other feature that you see in RackForms, please let us know at info@rackforms.com. We're always happy to help.